Hey everyone, it's Troy. This Friday, we're celebrating last week's 50th episode of Seacoast Stories with a West End bar crawl in Portsmouth. It starts at 6 p.m. at Treeline Outfitters. Then, we'll hit Loaded Question Brewing for some Seacoast Stories IPAs, followed by Liar's Bench and Mojo's West End Tavern. I really hope you'll join us. These are some of my favorite local businesses, and I want to give them as much business as we can. Plus, I want to hear all of your stories. And if alcohol isn't your thing, don't worry. There's plenty of non-alcoholic and food options available. The link to free tickets is in today's show notes. Speaking of Loaded Question, now on to today's episode. Welcome to Seacoast Stories, a podcast about the people, businesses, and newsmakers that make the Seacoast an American hidden gem. I'm Troy Farkas, and on today's episode, my conversation with Tom Bath, the head brewer of Loaded Question Brewing in Portsmouth. He's also the co-founder, and Tom takes tremendous pride in what he creates every day at the brewery. Delicious beer, a welcoming atmosphere, and the community feel that every Seacoast business dreams of having. That's what I love most about LQ. Every time I walk in that sketchy entrance, wind down the creepy hallway, and open the door, I'm immediately greeted by a face that I know. When I'm there, I always feel right at home. So, just a few days before LQ's 7th birthday, Tom and I discuss how he discovered craft beer in the 90s when he was living in Seattle. Plus, how Loaded Question came to be, what makes the brewery special, and how they're navigating the challenges plaguing the beer industry. Today's show is presented by Kim Vargo and We Feel Good. And for this story, we travel back to Tom's earlier years. The son of a military man, Tom grew up in chaos. In first grade alone, he attended 4 different schools. So military life was comfortable for him. So when it came time to choose his own path, Tom landed on the only thing he'd ever known.
Really, I just didn't know what I wanted to do, like many people in life. I'd gone to college for a year, wasn't excited about that, which in some ways I kind of wish I would have kept with it. On the other hand, it wouldn't have led me to where I am now, which I'm excited about. So after a year of college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I went to the recruiter's office, took a little test, and they were like, your scores are really good. Here's another test. And that's how I got into the nuclear program, which is, the Navy has a bunch of nuclear reactors on their submarines and their carriers, and it used to be a few other ships. And so I got a pretty good education from that, but knew that life was not for me for the long term.
So you moved out to the Pacific Northwest, and this is where you fell in love with beer. Can you take me back to the first time, if you remember, that you had a craft beer?
So there's a couple different spots or beers that I had, but the experience that I will say that I had the most was there was a brand called Thomas Kemper. Now they're still around, but they only make root beer. They got acquired and that brand stopped making beer, and kind of a story that's not relevant to this. But in a little town called Poulsbo, Washington, they had a brewery and tap room, and went there with a friend of mine in the Navy. We sat down and they had beers like a Bacon, and they had some traditional European styles, and then a bunch of stuff I just never heard of. And I was just like, what is all of this? And was just kind of blown away by the diversity of beer when at that point, that was probably 1993. For most of America, Killian's Red was an outlier, but everything else was kind of the mass-made beer.
And this was pretty common in the 90s out in that part of the country, but not in this part of the country, right?
Yeah, there were a bunch of breweries that were available out there at the time. Full Sail, Moss Bay, Hales Ales. Obviously, Sierra Nevada was out there. Thomas Kemper, as I said. There was a whole bunch of brew pubs called McMenamin's. But yeah, it was already kind of ubiquitous in that area.
The brewery scene in New England, a lot of the breweries you'll find in the warehouses and the abandoned places that you then turn into a brewery. So that's my perception really of what breweries are. Is that the vibe that, the breweries you were going to in the 90s in Seattle?
It's kind of a difficult answer. That certainly is what it became by like 2005, 2010. Certainly that was the case. At that moment, though, in the late 80s, early 90s, when the craft beer scene started getting big out there, there wasn't really a customer base for that type of brewery yet. So most breweries that opened up were either a brew pub, kind of like the Portsmouth brewery was, that was a very kind of attractive business model to people who wanted to do that.
Where they serve food as well. That's what a brew pub is.
So a restaurant and thing. And the industry is kind of coming back to that, but that's a whole other story that we'll probably get to. Or somebody who had a lot more capital. Red Hook was a good example. Like they did, people up here are familiar with them, but they started in Seattle in a neighborhood called Ballard in like an old transmission shop. But the guy behind it had some money, and pretty quickly they turned into a reasonably large regional brewery. And then eventually found their way out here after being acquired by Anheuser-Busch.
So this discovery that you made of craft beer in the 90s, something unlike you had before then, you actually were inspired to start making your own at home.
There was a guy on my ship who brewed beer, and I'd already started to fall in love with craft beer, and then I had no idea you could make it yourself. And once I found that out, within a week went the Pike Place Market used to have a homebrew supply store in there, and got my first brewing kit. And I think that was 1994, and made my first few terrible batches of beer.
Rite of passage, I'm sure.
Yes.
Take me into your home brewing experiment. Paint the scene. Where in your house are you doing this? What is all the equipment involved?
So I had a one-room apartment in Seattle with a friend of mine. We didn't have enough money for a two-bedroom, so the living room was also a bedroom. And we brewed a small batch of amber, which was, at least at the time, I think everybody's first beer. Just brewed it right on the stovetop. It was hard to get 5 gallons up to a boil because, your average stove doesn't put off that much heat. And at the end of the fermentation process, you put it in bottles, which is a pain because you have to clean all the bottles. And then you add some priming sugar, which there's a little bit of leftover yeast in the beer. And the priming sugar gives it something to carbonate, and then it carbonates in the bottles. And I distinctly remember what I did was added a little bit to each bottle, which was unbelievably dumb. I should have added a little bit to the whole batch and then put that in every bottle, because some bottles exploded while others were undercarbed, because it's hard to put in the perfect amount of priming sugar. So that first recipe was pretty much a disaster all the way around.
Was it safe to taste? That's always my concern with home brewing. Like, is this even edible?
As long as it actually fermented, yes. So beer has no known pathogens that live in it. And the reason for that is both the combination of alcohol and the pH. It's a little acidic, so nothing grows in there that will hurt you.
So what are the most common home brewing mistakes that not only you perhaps made them, but just people in general?
Probably the biggest one is people when they're starting, they just don't clean adequately. And sanitation is a huge part of brewing, because sanitation, you're dealing with a live organism in yeast, and anything that can get in there can cause the yeast to get stressed out and create all kinds of terrible off flavors. So sanitation is, there's a reason we call brewers janitors.
Yeah, I saw your tap list online earlier, and at the top of the tap list, it said, we just cleaned our tanks or whatever a few weeks ago. I've never seen that as a selling point to go drink beer.
We clean our draft lines.
Clean the draft lines,
Except
yes.
We clean the tank every time before we brew into it, and then again after brewing into it. But we clean our draft lines every 2 weeks. Nat just did them today because it has a big impact on the flavor of the beer. Things will start growing in your beer. Again, they won't make you sick, but if a beer doesn't taste right at some place you're at, there's a good chance it's because they haven't cleaned the draft lines.
Oh, wow. See, that's something I never would have thought about. All right, so you're home brewing in your apartments that you can hardly afford. For how long did you do this, and what was really your motivation for doing this?
Motivation was, I've always been somebody who's kind of curious and likes to make things. I like science, so brewing is a great kind of nexus of creativity and science and stuff. And then it's just fun to have beer with your friends. It's kind of makes it a little more communal and satisfying when you've done it yourself. And I didn't brew super consistently for those first couple years, probably 3 or 4 batches a year. I mean, even though 5 gallons isn't a massive amount of beer, it's pretty hard for one person to go through that much beer too quickly.
You'd be surprised.
At this point in my life, I wouldn't be. But and I brewed pretty consistently, but only a few batches a year until in about 2008, I had a condo south of Seattle, and a refrigerator in my house, I couldn't get it to close all the way. the hinges were messed up. But if you took all the weight out of it, all the stuff in the refrigerator door, it did. So I replaced that refrigerator and turned it into a kegerator. So one of the big pains about brewing is bottling. Kegging is much, much easier. You don't have to clean 8 million bottles. So once I did that, I just started brewing quite a bit more. Again, I ran into the challenge of having too much beer. But I worked at REI's headquarters at that time and would start having an annual Christmas party at my house where we'd go through about 30 gallons of beer.
That you made all yourself?
Yeah.
Wow. That's really cool.
Yeah. It was great. That was super satisfying when people were like, why don't you open a brewery? I was like, because I'm working at REI, which is a great job. And I get the fun without the stress.
Yeah.
So it's a great combination.
And we'll get to that in a moment. So when did you make the transition from working in the Navy to this job at REI?
So I got out of the Navy in, late 96, and had a couple other jobs kind of while I was a snowboard bum for about a year and a half. And I think I started working at REI in the spring of 98. Just got a job there, started as a cashier, worked my way into the snowboarding department and the climbing department in the summer. And then eventually got a job at their headquarters in their R&D lab because I have an engineering degree and just kind of progressed. Yeah.
Okay, wait. So you said you were a snowboard bum?
Yes.
What does that mean?
That means I was snowboarding 100 days a winter for a while.
Yeah. And not doing anything professionally, just that?
For that first winter when I got out of the Navy, I had a season pass and a bunch of money saved up. And
that sounds like a dream.
I slept in a snow cave that some friends and I had dug out on the opposite side of the highway from the ski area. So we could save money and didn't have to drive back and forth from Seattle.
Wait, so you guys made yourself like an igloo?
Igloo is above the surface of the snow. This is below the surface. You dig in a cave onto it.
So you guys just slept in the snow?
Yeah, it's great.
How long did you do this?
It depended on kind of what the weather was like. But if, the snow is great, you don't want to have to commute up the next day. You just spend the night in the snow cave. And so I think the longest we probably did it in a row was like 4 nights, Eventually you decide you really want to shower.
How did you survive? It's freezing.
It's only about 32 degrees inside of a snow cave, regardless of how cold it is outside.
Of course.
And if you have a good sleeping bag and more importantly, the pad, or just as importantly, a good sleeping pad, it's no problem. And, you're already wearing outdoor winter gear. So,
yeah. How did you learn the survival skills for this? Because I know none of this stuff. I could never sleep in a snow cave for 4 days and survive. I have no idea what I'm doing.
I don't know. The Pacific Northwest has a very outdoorsy culture. It's not uncommon for people to go on a first date to like the climbing gym or something. It's just a cliche that is absolutely true that everybody owns a Subaru and a mountain bike and knows how to at least belay somebody for rock climbing. And it is a very outdoorsy city.
Wow. Okay. So what were you guys doing to sustain yourselves while you were sleeping in this snow cave for often 4 days at a time?
So typically, you'd load up the car with a cooler, just so things don't freeze, actually, the bigger reason. You're actually using the cooler to keep it warm, ironically. I would bring some food, but, at the end of the day, would usually, they had night skiing at that ski area and get a few runs at night, go into the bar, have a couple beers. Night skiing went until 9 or 10 o'clock. I'm not sure anymore. It's been a few years. Eventually you knew some of the staff and might get the last slice of pizza or something at the end of the night that they were going to throw out anyway, and then cross the highway and crawl into your snow cave and do it all over again the next day.
Wow. Okay. So the outdoors are very important to you. If anyone who knows you, they certainly know that about you. So you are working in R&D and REI. You said you moved for the headquarters. Where is that?
It was in Kent, Washington, which is 20 minutes south of Seattle.
Okay. So you were there for the REI job for how long?
I worked at REI for about 17 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. When you look back on that experience, how do you feel about it?
I think I look at it similar to the way I look at the brewery, where it's been a great experience and part of my life. And a lot of the people that I knew there, I consider more than just coworkers or customers. They're really friends. And it was a great experience. Loved everything about it. There are two industries which I think have a lot of overlap, where they're very much driven by the culture. People do it because they love it, not because the money's great.
What would you say are the biggest things you learned or lessons you learned from working in that industry?
Tell you a few things that I learned that definitely influenced what I did here at the brewery. One is the best product doesn't always sell the best. People often think the best design backpack or the best design stove, whatever it is. So working in the R&D lab, we used to test a lot of equipment. Oftentimes those weren't best sellers, sometimes because it was expensive. But the reality is a lot of what drives successful brands really is culture and marketing. Hopefully the marketing is authentic and really represents the culture. But that authenticity, learning that it's not all about the product, you're selling an experience and a vibe and a community that people want to be a part of. So that's the one thing I would learned. And then I'd also say just kind of how to think about business differently. I would not consider myself an expert on business by any stretch, but my department, the house brand at REI, was part of the merchandising department. So I would sit in the monthly merchandising meetings and would listen to people who were like visual merchants or somebody from the marketing team or somebody who did statistical analysis on the way people shop and things. And so just being exposed to all these different elements of business makes me aware of all the things that I don't know or need to be more aware of. I think the hardest thing about opening a business, it's almost a cliche these days, but you don't know what you don't know. I think I at least was aware of more things than some people are when they start off, which gave me a big boost.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure you've carried many of those lessons here. So REI for 17 years. At what point do you come to the Northeast?
REI was going through a big structural change, just got a new CEO and stuff. And I was part of a realignment. I got laid off. I think I was kind of a more senior, making a little more money. And so it's kind of a natural process. So sent out some resumes, and there was a company here in New England that hired me. It was a small company that makes some really good equipment and stuff. But it really wasn't a great fit between me and them. I had years of experience in the outdoor industry, and they just kind of had a different philosophy. And I had just bought a house and just had a daughter and wasn't really sure what to do, but had a friend that was willing to open a brewery with me. And then he introduced me to our third partner, and my wife was on board. So kind of got ahead of your question a little bit, but there you go.
Well, you're a smart man, so you're reading my mind. So when did the idea for a brewery first come to mind for you? Had it ever come to mind for you in all your years of home brewing?
It definitely had. There's a brewery in Seattle that I was friends with the owner of, Airways Brewing. And knowing somebody that owns a brewery makes it seem more plausible, more realistic, something that's, you might actually be able to achieve. And I had thought about it. But the reality is, when I was working at REI, I had great benefits, decent salary, good culture. Why would you want to leave that for something with so much uncertainty? So I definitely thought about it, but there was no reason to leave where I was at. And then when I was out here, the situation had changed, and not only had my situation changed, but there was an opportunity because I had two other people that were willing to do this with me because it's a pretty big endeavor. So I pulled the trigger and been terrified ever since, but happy at the same time.
Coming up, Tom lays out the vision he had for Loaded Questions 7 years ago and why he wants to keep his small business small. But first, I'm sure environment lover Tom would want you to know these stunning facts: that 91% of the plastic in the US is never recycled, or that 50% of plastic is only used one time. I didn't know these things. That is, until I started shopping at one of my absolute favorite Seacoast businesses, We Feel Good in Kittery. It's a low-waste refill store with one focus: to help you live more sustainably. At We Feel Good, there's a plethora of life-changing products that make you feel better both inside and out. There's shampoo bars, lotion bars, makeup, reusable cutlery, sponges, lunchboxes, none of which involve plastic. I personally love the toothpaste tablets, which are perfect for when I'm traveling. And every couple weeks, I take my glass containers and the store's owner, Marla, fills them up with all-natural body wash, hand soap, and shampoo, which keep me feeling squeaky clean and guilt-free. Plus, so many of the products they sell are locally made, and best of all, they're actually affordable. This place, I swear, is almost too good to be true. So this Earth Day, do yourself and the planet a favor and visit We Feel Good. At checkout this week only, you can mention stories at the register, and they'll give 10% off your order, which was clutch when I went the other day. That's 10% off with the word stories at checkout. What also sounds too good to be true is getting more of my time back, because lately I have been so overwhelmed. I just became a certified yoga teacher, and now I'm on the hunt for a teaching job. I'm planning several podcast-related events, working a full-time job at Spotify, exercising, hitting all of the local spots, interviewing Seacoast standouts, and trying to grow this show, all while fighting the never-ending battle of diabetes. It's a lot. It's a lot just saying it. And I need help from amazing Seacoast people like Kim Vargo. Kim, who I've known for a while now, is a pro at helping you cut down on the time-sucking admin tasks that take you away from what you love creating. She helps service-based professionals automate your business so that you can get more time, freedom, and flexibility, which is something we all dream of having more of. If you value efficiency and are finally ready to invest in growing your business with less stress, then I think you should head over to kimvargo.com/contact. And in the message box, say that Seacoast Stories sent you for a free call and a custom discount tailored to your business needs. She takes the time to truly understand your business, and I think she could help you if you're also overwhelmed. Thank you, Kim, and thank you to We Feel Good for supporting the show. Now back to today's story. Okay, so when you guys made the decision to go all in on this, what was the original vision for Loaded Question?
Honestly, I think it's not too far from where we've ended up. We debated some different business models. There's kind of the bigger production thing, which we went against for two reasons. One, it's just a lot more money to put into stainless steel because you need a much bigger production facility for that. And two, speaking for myself, if all you're doing is making beer and you don't have a tap room and there's not a community, then it's just another job. Making beer isn't the fun part of owning a brewery. It's the community and talking to people and giving people a place to come together. So the tap room was a big part of kind of our initial vision. And I think it seems like it's stuck to that pretty well.
Yeah. And just for the uninitiated, when you say tap room, that just means a place for people to, in your words, what is a tap room?
For a brewery, at least, it's usually on premises. So where you're brewing, it is the business. It's like the bar element of the business that is attached to the physical brewery. So people can come in, they can see the tanks, but they also get their beer. They know it's fresh. And it just provides a place for people to kind of gather and be together in the community.
Gotcha. So you guys brew about 400 barrels a year?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So that's, to your point, you said that's on the smaller side of things. Why didn't you want to do it bigger? To really, to get your stuff into stores, to be able to get Loaded Question beer on tap more at other places?
So there's a bunch of reasons. One is beer in-house is just more profitable. You make more off of a pint of beer than you do a 4-pack to grocery stores. You make very little off of that, particularly once you go through a distributor. And it requires, in order to kind of brew the volume of beer that can get you the margins you need a much larger system. So the capital involved up front is much, much larger. And I kind of just looked at the atmosphere of all these breweries, popping up everywhere. And I just thought, that I knew it was going to be a bubble at some point. Knowing when, of course, is very difficult. But I just looked at it and thought, if you've put in a bunch of money and then you can't sell that beer, now you still owe the money to the bank or wherever you got your fundraising from. How do you get that back? And so this was just, despite what people think, I'm not that much of a risk taker, or at least I don't think of myself as a risk taker. And that was just a risk that was too big for all of us.
On the subject of risk, you mentioned that this was a big risk starting this, leaving, the cushier career behind. Why did you really want to go all in on this? Because with your co-founders, they still had other things going on, but this was your thing.
Yeah. So Ben Moy and Mark Weidman are the other two founders. Mark never intended to work here, but Ben and I both did. But once we opened and saw our revenue, we just knew we couldn't afford 2 people. And because I was the brewer, he couldn't be the one to do it. So it kind of fell on me. Yeah. And why did I want to take the risk? It's a difficult question. I guess I felt like...
It's a loaded question.
It is indeed. I'd always wanted, being in business or working at RAI and then other places I've worked, you kind of like watch what's going on in the business. And we all sit there and think to ourselves, I could do it better. That's obviously a little delusional. But there is a question of like, could I do it myself? And on some level, it was like, I was 45 when we opened it, just had a kid, just bought a house. And I was like, if I'm ever going to kind of like take that leap to see if I can do something like this, it really has to be now. The closer you are to retirement, the worse of an idea that is. And so and my wife was crazy enough to say yes and tell me to do it. And so, yeah, and I was thankful to have Mark and Ben to do it with me.
What was it like to have that support from her and Mark and Ben for this scary thing?
It was great. The only thing that is you can't convey is when somebody does support you that much, you feel a huge emotional debt or burden to make sure you execute and get everything off the ground. If somebody's going to put that sort of money and faith and trust in you, I didn't anticipate how much I would feel that weight. Not that they ever put it on me, but if people have faith in you, good humans, I think, want to give back and reciprocate that sort of, I don't know what the term is, but the effort that warrants that trust. And so I'm glad I've done it, but it was emotionally harder than I thought it would be.
So with that pressure and this just new chapter of your life, when you guys did successfully open the doors of Loaded Question in 2018 and you see the beers on tap and you see the vision come to life and you see patrons coming in and enjoying this beer and exploring this new space, what did that feel like for you?
It was amazing. And there were a couple times in the process of opening that we obviously know the owners of Liar's Bench pretty well. And Dane over there, who's the brewer, told me, don't worry, Tom, one day you'll be standing behind the bar, it'll be super busy and you'll be looking over everybody and it'll feel great. And those words, they stuck with me. I don't know if I've ever told him that, but yeah, it was a great moment. And it did give me some hope and to persevere. And he was right. When we opened, looking at that was very satisfying. Still, there's times where I'm here and what feels best about the whole thing is seeing people who are happy and enjoying the space and each other's company. And it does feel like a nice little family here. And that feels great.
And we're approaching 7 years strong. The 7-year birthday party of Loaded Question happening this coming Saturday. On the subject of the competition, it's really heartwarming to hear you say that about Liar's Bench.
Yeah, I hate to interrupt, actually, but I also got to give credit to Earth Eagle.
Yeah.
Knowing I was opening a brewery, they hired me as a bartender, and I bartended them for 1.5 years while I was working on this project.
Really?
Yeah, so that's the sort of like community that you really can't get in a lot of industries.
Yeah, that is so wild. And especially in this area. I've lived in a bunch of places and I've never been somewhere where people have very similar businesses and are supportive of each other and not trying to tear one another down.
We'll still be competitive. We all think we make the best beer, even though that's
but it's a friendly competition.
It's a ridiculous thing. Whose is the best is
it's
a matter of opinion. Anyway,
I mean, you're the brewmaster, so I totally understand that. But like, you'll send people to Liar's Bench and recommend a beer, and Earth Eagle will hire you, even though you're gonna open up a place a year later.
Yep, that's
pretty unheard of.
Yeah,
and it's still that way.
Yeah, I think the business has changed. Obviously, I don't know how much your listeners are aware, but the craft beer industry is definitely struggling a little bit at the moment. And there are breweries. I just was speaking to our rep for hops for one of the companies we get hops from, and she said she's been with that company now for about 4 months and is closing 30 accounts a month right now.
Wow.
So I think in these tough times, people, I don't want to say we're not collaborating, but we're so focused on what's going on in our business, we don't have time to collaborate at the moment. But there's still that love is still there.
So what is going on in the industry right now?
I think there's a few drivers. One is, there's just saturation. There's a ton of breweries and there's only, so much shelf space in grocery stores and you can only have so many tap rooms. I think another thing that happened, particularly as it pertains to like grocery stores and that sort of part of the business, is when COVID hit, a whole bunch of people invested a whole bunch of money in canning lines and other things to try to compete there. But again, there's only so much space and the margins grocery stores want or demand give you very little of the profit. And so if you're a really big brewery and have the economies of scale to do that, you can survive. But some of these smaller breweries that are taking tiny margins, it just doesn't make sense, particularly as there's more and more breweries. If you're the first, when your beer hits the shelf at a store, it does great for the first couple months because it's new and people grab it. But then 2 months later, there's 3 more breweries on the shelf. And I think it gave people a short-term kind of return on their investment, but then dropped off and now they still have to pay for all their equipment. So, yeah.
So saturation, what else is going on? There's been some changing consumer habits as well.
Yeah. People talk about the younger generation drinking less. And I think there's some truth to that for sure. I also just think, particularly when it comes to Gen Z, it's a much smaller generation than millennials. But people forget that millennials are now 38 and have 2 kids. Like, of course, they're not drinking as much as where they were when they were 25. I wouldn't want them to. Yeah, so it's just sometimes people want to blame it on something. And I think it's sometimes more an evolution of what's going on in the world, kind of bigger picture. Yeah.
And so what is Loaded Question doing to go with these changes and to keep people drinking LQ beer?
I'd say we're focusing on really what we've been doing because I think the way the market has evolved, the really big guys can have the grocery stores. I don't want a part of that. The mid-sized guys have a tough time because they don't quite have the economy of scale to compete against the big guys in grocery stores, but fairly or unfairly, and I think in a lot of cases unfairly, once you kind of get to a certain size, people don't perceive you as cool anymore. You're not the cool, trendy brewery. And so us kind of staying small, not trying to compete on grocery stores, knowing who we are, and focusing on kind of the community and the atmosphere of the brewery, kind of a local gathering spot. It's great.
On the cool, trendy brewery aspect, I love this place, and I love the physical location of it. Whenever I meet someone here for the first time, they've never been to Loaded Question, I will send them in the text message before. If you think you're in the wrong place, you're in the right place. Can you tell me how you came upon this location specifically in the West End and what people's reaction are when they come here the first time?
So, yeah, actually, I live just around the corner from here, about a third of a mile away. So I had seen the building and we were working with the real estate agent at the time to try and find a spot. And when I asked about the building, he's like, "Oh, you don't want that building. The landlord's terrible." And as it turned out, he was absolutely right. It was even worse than I could have imagined, but we survived it. We have new ownership now. The building is getting renovated, and yeah, I think it's great. But as you suggested, the entrance is a little odd. We're not even on the street. We're in a building behind a building next to an auto shop at the end of a 150-foot long hallway that clearly used to have like forklifts and stuff going down it. Yeah, so it's kind of a built-in speakeasy feel. Yeah, nobody accidentally wanders into Loaded Question. It just doesn't happen.
Right. And now, how is that for the business model? Because this is not a place that is in downtown Portsmouth that you're just going to walk by and be like, "Oh, brewery, let's go in there."
It does make getting new customers a challenge, but I also think it's part of why the kind of atmosphere and stuff is great. When we opened, I knew with this location, we weren't going to be getting like a bachelorette party that was wandering through downtown deciding to stop in. It's just not, no, if they've wandered this far, you don't want to serve them anymore. So our target customer was locals and the craft beer tourists, the people who, there's plenty of people who will like drive to a town because they see there's 5 breweries in it and want to hit all the breweries. And those people were going to find us no matter where we were. And I think because the people that are here are, it's not people just looking to get drunk, although people are certainly looking to enjoy a beer too.
I've been drunk here a couple of times.
it just creates a different sort of atmosphere than you get the closer you get to downtown. And I think that was somewhat defined by this location and somewhat intentional.
Right. So I think this is a good, because I know a lot of Seacoast business owners listen. I think this is a really good example of knowing your why, knowing the customer base that you want. Even, conventional business wisdom will be like, be in the place that gets the most foot traffic, that you can bring in the most revenue. But you're like, I know who I want to bring in, and it's not necessarily the person who's just like drunk floating through downtown. We want people to make a point to come here.
Absolutely. There are breweries I've seen in classic retail space, but the traffic is high, but why people are, shopping for shoes or whatever, they're not the target traffic. So,
right. On the subject of the community here, this is something that was top of mind for you guys as you were opening Loaded Question. You wanted this to be a gathering space for people that you would want to hang out with. I would say of all the drinking spots I've frequented on the Seacoast, this is the spot for just hanging out with good people in like a chill, not getting rowdy vibe. Let's just have a drink and a conversation and some laughs, which I think is really special. What do you attribute that to?
I think it's a couple things. One is just you're not getting like the tourist vibe. When you're getting those people who are just looking to party, that can change things. We close at 9:00. We don't serve hard liquor. Those things also change the atmosphere. And then when I designed the space, I thought a lot about what I had enjoyed about breweries before. And it was when you go there, you end up talking to people. And things that do that are things like we have a big L-shaped bar. When there's an L shape, you can talk to people across the way. Kind of the fixture we're sitting at right now also lets to it. So Liar's Bench does a good job of it too. Like big communal tables. When you go to a restaurant, you never interact with the people around you because you have your own table. Having a space that lends itself towards meeting other people and engaging with them, I think helps create that atmosphere.
That's brilliant. I had never even thought about that. Wow. Now, why do you think this is a place, not only just to what you said, the intentional design of it, but why is this a place that people keep coming back to and keep wanting to hang out with people at?
I mean, I think it's just all about the relationships. It does have a bit of that Cheers feel, as much as that is overdone. I think there's a balance there, though. I like going to a place where it seems like everybody knows each other, but not so much so that it's not welcoming and it's a closed community. And I think we strike a pretty good balance there, where you go in, it feels warm, everybody knows each other, but you can also meet people and kind of become a part of it pretty easily.
We talked about the everyone helping each other out feel here in this town. And this is certainly something that you guys believe in as well, namely with the some of the partnerships that you've done, whether that's the Treeline Pale Ale with our friends at Treeline, whether that's the Seacoast Stories IPA. You guys now, for the Loaded Question Book Club, which is another thing you guys do, now have a partnership with past guest Read More Books and Brews in downtown Portsmouth. And you've also done some one-off things with nonprofits in the area as well. Why are these kinds of collaborations with other businesses a part of Loaded Question's ethos?
For a couple of reasons. One, there's the old saying that rising tide, lifts all boats, which we believe in. The more we kind of help our friends, the more they're going to help us, and that pays off. And then it's also just a very practical perspective. It exposes your business to new people. Treeline gets to, some of our customers get to know them and vice versa. The same thing with the charitable stuff. So we do a beer for Surfrider, which is a nonprofit that basically it's national, but New Hampshire chapter is who we work with, and they advocate for water quality at the beaches and beach access. We do a beer with the Portsmouth Firefighters Charitable Association, which raises money for victims of fires. We're going to do a beer for the New Hampshire chapter of the New England Mountain Biking Association. We don't always give these people a lot of money just because realistically we can't, but we give them a place to come, do a raffle or an auction, usually donate a portion of the proceeds to beer. And then it helps, or to their charity, and then it helps us get exposed to more customers. And I think the customers who are going to charitable events are the sort of kind of community-oriented people that we would want in our business.
Now, when you guys got approached last summer by just a nothing podcaster who wanted to do the Seacoast Stories IPA with Loaded Question, why did you guys say yes to that?
I think we have some friends in common, like Kelly Garcia, certainly.
Yeah, great people.
And she bartends here, and she's awesome, spoke highly of you and said we should do it. And so most of our staff is pretty tight. And so when they tell me things, I tend to trust them.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was pretty, didn't even really dig into it much. She had told me and I was like, yeah, let's go for it.
Love that.
Kelly's a pretty smart, thorough person and careful. So
yeah. To take you all into the behind the scenes, on the second episode of Seacoast Stories last June, I just threw it out there. I want to make the Seacoast Stories IPA. If any brewery is listening, slide into my DMs. A couple weeks go by, Kelly messaged me and said, I think Loaded Question could be into this. And I said, really? A couple weeks go by. I come here to meet with Kelly and with Pete, one of the instrumental men around here as well. Everyone loves Pete. Pete's one of my favorites. And so we have a lovely meeting over one too many IPAs. I'm such a lightweight. After two, I was like, wow, I'm having myself a good night. And so we just chit-chatted for a couple hours, and he brought it to you eventually, and you greenlit it.
Yeah, when you bring up Pete, it does, and speaking of Kelly, it really does make me think, one of the things that makes, I think, this place special too is our bartenders. Whether it's Jeff or Pete or Stephanie, Kelly, Dennis. I mean, you go to some places and the people aren't that warm and it just makes you feel like, not maybe that you're bothering them or something, but it's very transactional. I think our bartenders are very personable and engaging, and that just creates an atmosphere where people are having more fun, start talking. And yeah, I can't give enough credit to our staff.
Yeah,
actually.
Absolutely. Your staff is really incredible. That's another big reason why I love coming here. So using the Seacoast Stories IPA as an example, let's not get too scientific. Take me the process, soup to nuts, of making a beer like that.
Well, we talked about style and you wanted an IPA and kind of told me what you wanted in a beer. And so writing recipes, basically the ingredients are, hops, water, malt, malted barley specifically, and yeast. And so if you've been doing that for a while, you kind of know. So that part's pretty straightforward in my mind.
Right. And where do you get all of these from?
All of our yeast comes from a company that has a San Diego location and an Asheville location. Not all of it, most of it. White Labs. Our malt, 90% of our malt comes from Blue Ox malt, which is grown in Aroostook County, Maine, and then malted in like the Lewiston, Auburn area. Yeah, and they've just won some awards for the quality of their malt. They're the largest floor malted maltster in the country. So normally malting is the process of letting your grain start to, you told me not to get too scientific and I just can't help myself.
I know.
Anyway, floor malted is a very traditional way of doing it. We'll just say that.
Okay.
And then hops really grow best. There are a few hop farms up here, but with our high humidity, they tend to get a lot of downy mildew and have big variability from year to year. So as much as I would like to use more local hops, there's a few varieties I get, but most of it comes from the Pacific Northwest. And then there's a few hops. Galaxy is in Just Lucky, and that comes from Australia.
I love Galaxy hops.
And then Nelson Sauvin, which kind of has a white grape character, is in Shimmer, and it's also in Islington Genuine Draft, and that's a New Zealand hop.
Okay. So you have the ingredients, and you write your ingredients list for what you need for this beer, and then what?
Then we mill the grain, so just you crack the seeds, basically, so water can get into them and then pull the stuff out. You mix that grain with hot water. That hot water breaks unfermentable starches down into fermentable sugars. You take all that water, you put it into a boil kettle, or you boil it, which sterilizes it, helps develop a little flavor. You can add some hops to there, which will isomerize some alpha acids and some other things. After you've boiled it, you run it through a heat exchanger to cool it down to 65 degrees or so, put it in a fermenter, add yeast, and then let it ferment, usually at a very specific temperature, because the temperature you're fermenting at can have a big effect on the flavor of the beer. So,
for how long does it ferment?
It depends, but most beers probably are around 2 weeks.
Okay. I give you credit. That was a pretty good explanation. You did not lose me there.
That's a rare accomplishment on my part.
Well done. Well, good news. The Seacoast Stories IPA is now back on tap here at Loaded Question. My artist friend Amy, who also hosts her Paint Everywhere club here sometimes as well, she designed the can, and it's of the Memorial Bridge. And it's I'm not just saying this because I'm biased. It's such a good beer, and you guys ran out of it pretty quickly when we brewed it in December, and it was also on tap at Treeline, and they ran out of it in like record speed.
So I'm gonna admit something that brewers don't like to normally admit. But when we were talking about this, Troy basically said, "Well, I really like Maine beer lunch. So does everybody, but I didn't really want to just copy that beer. Like, if you've been brewing for a while, you can go on the internet and figure out things. So I was like, okay, how can I make something like that, but then tweak it a little bit? So it's in the same ballpark, and if you like that, you'll probably like this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to Maine Beer for making a great beer for us to
the Maine
be inspired by.
Lunch beer as well. So that's on tap, and it will be on tap for our Seacoast Stories bar crawl this Friday, which Loaded Question is a part of. So, and everyone will get $1 off a beer as well. So thank you, Tom, for greenlighting that. We can't wait to come hang out with you. But that's only one thing happening this weekend. Also happening this weekend, the 7-year birthday party of Loaded Question. What's on tap for that?
Going to have pizzas, being fresh. We don't do a ton of food here, but we're going to make pizzas that day. One of our regulars is going to come in and kind of do a pop-up. He's worked at a bunch of restaurants in town. Great guy, James. And then we are going to have for those of you who like Just Lucky, there's going to be a beer called Lucky Sevens on, which is a 7.7 version of Just Lucky that we're brewing and got can labels made up for.
Oh boy.
There'll probably be a few other things. We're trying to lock down a band and some stuff.
Okay.
Last minute.
All right. Love that. Very excited for that. On the subject of food, we didn't discuss this earlier. When you guys started Loaded Question, it's been my understanding there's been a whole bunch of law changes regarding brewery and food and how much you have to serve of each things. Just take me back into how the evolution of your guys' relationship to serving food.
Yeah. So when we opened, unless you had food, and the food required like 3 things on the menu, at least one thing hot, one thing cold, and one thing prepared on site. So we had a pretty simple menu that covered that. Actually, we didn't when we opened, so we could only serve tasters, 4-ounce taster glasses. About 6 months in, we managed to get the kitchen going so we could serve pints. And then we've kind of been in the same situation the whole time. We haven't changed, but the laws are continuing to change. We keep our food pretty simple. About the only thing we do differently now is Pete has been working with a charity called Community Fridge, where we do a special on Friday and Saturday. It's usually a fairly small plate. You can buy one for yourself, but you could also buy one for the fridge. And then we take that food and give it to the community fridge where anybody can go in and get the food without any judgment or anything. So it's kind of a food pantry thing for locals.
That's so cool. And I've been meaning to get over there to check that out. I personally love your beer nuts that you guys have. One of my favorite pastimes is just to come to Load a Question on a Wednesday or Thursday night, grab me a Just Lucky or a Seacoast Stories IPA when it's on tap, and those nuts, and just work and edit the podcast, and I'm in heaven.
Yeah. Keep it simple. It's our thing with the food.
Yeah.
Couple tasty items. You don't need to do too much more than that.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for joining me today. I don't think I have any other burning questions. I always forget something. Oh, Kelly. In preparation for this conversation, I approached her about some things that I wouldn't know, but that she would know about you. Tell me about your mother's stint on Jeopardy.
So my mom was on Jeopardy 52 years ago when the original host, Art Fleming, was on it when she was like 19 in college. And she was winning until Final Jeopardy and then lost. And it had always kind of bothered her that she was on Jeopardy. And I guess the rule is you can't get on it twice, but because she was on the old Jeopardy, now obviously champions get invited back, but if you've lost, you just don't come back. So she got on it again and won a couple games. And then they had normally they do a tournament of champions, but I think because of COVID, they didn't quite have enough people for that. So they had a second chance. tournament for that. So she ended up kind of going on like 3 separate times. Yeah. Come from a nerdy family.
Wow.
Yeah.
When are we going to see you on Jeopardy?
They don't do enough science stuff. She's like good at things like French literature and things that I would need a specific type of trivia to be good at. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm actually low-key really good at Jeopardy. And whenever people ask me about my studies, I was a history major and they're like, oh, what do you do with that? And I always say, well, I want to win on Jeopardy one day. That's the real career dream. My problem is, Tom, the Bible categories, I know nothing. And the pop culture-y movie TV shows, I know nothing. Other than that, I'm really good.
Yeah. My mom in her 70s, but not great at the pop culture ones either. Yep.
I should maybe if I, actually read the Bible, I could do well in a good Bible category. So maybe one day, Tom. Tom, we have one final question. We ask the same final question at the end of every episode every week. And I'll ask it to you, even though it's a bit of a loaded question. Knowing what you know now in hindsight about how things have turned out for you, what advice would you give to your younger 22-year-old self to prepare him for what's about to come?
Start saving money earlier. Says the guy who took 6 months off to just snowboard. Yeah. It's an answer which is used too often, but I really don't know that I'd do anything differently. Maybe there's little things, but in the grand scheme of things, I've been unbelievably fortunate, been exposed to a lot of things because I moved around, got to see a lot and do a lot. And, the more you experience and see in life, so that's probably my advice to anybody is, expose yourself to as much as you can, travel, pick up, new activities, read books that you wouldn't read. The more you learn and experience in life, the more prepared you'll be for whatever life throws at you.
That's Tom Bath of Loaded Question Brewing in Portsmouth. To support them, you can attend our bar crawl Friday night, their 7th anniversary party on Saturday, or purchase a beautiful 4-pack of Seacoast Stories IPAs for your home fridge. And if you'd be willing to support this show, an honest review on Apple Podcasts would mean the world to us. That's it for today's episode. But if you see me around town this week, perhaps at the yoga parlor, the goat, or walking on the rail trail, then please stop me and say hi. I would love to hear your story. I'll be back Thursday with a special bonus episode. So until then, have a great week. Live free or die.